I am by no means an architect of ruin, but I am a woman who understands the quiet, devastating power of time. People assume vengeance is a sudden blazing fire, a slashed tire, a screamed insult, a hurled glass. But true retribution is a glacier. It moves imperceptibly, carving through solid rock, unnoticed until the landscape is entirely reshaped. I never set out to destroy a man's life, nor did I expect to find the love of my own life while doing so. But the universe has a peculiar sense of humor. What began as a desperate bid for justice over a real estate scam slowly morphed into a meticulously crafted psychological siege. And along the way, I learned that karma is a patient, spiteful, and undeniably romantic entity. 7 years ago, I finally held the brass key to my own sanctuary. I had saved for 10 grueling years, working double shifts until the soles of my boots wore thin and my bank account swelled just enough to afford a modest slice of independence. Being a single woman relying entirely on one income meant compromises. I couldn't afford a sprawling estate, so I hunted for a property on a shared block. In my region, this usually meant dealing with a strata title. A collective ownership arrangement complete with communal repair funds, cheaper collective insurance, and a suffocating list of bylaws dictating everything from the color of your curtains to the weight of your pets. As an aggressively private person who craved autonomy, submitting to a committee of nosy neighbors was entirely out of the question. I searched for months until I found the unicorn, a shared block but with a freehold title. Absolute ownership. The only caveat was a shared public liability insurance policy for the narrow gravel walkway dividing the properties, a cost split equally between the owners. It was perfect. The broker who handled the sale was a local fixture named Thane. He wore sharp navy blue suits that smelled faintly of expensive gin and possessed the kind of blinding, practiced smile that suggested he had never been told no in his entire life. There were about 3 degrees of separation between us in our mid-sized city. We shared mutual acquaintances, which gave me a false sense of security. I trusted the paperwork. I trusted the process. 5 months after I moved in, the scent of fresh paint still lingering in the hallway, a heavy knock rattled my front door. It was Una, the landlord of the adjoining property, holding a manila folder. She had come to discuss the walkway insurance. Eager to keep my records pristine, I asked for a copy of the policy. She slid the stapled pages across my kitchen island. I scanned the top line and the warmth drained from my face. It was a strata insurance policy. Confusion curdled into panic. I spent the next 48 hours buried in legal jargon, firing off emails and making frantic phone calls. The horrifying truth bubbled to the surface. The property was not freehold, it was a strata title. Thane had blatantly, provably lied. I immediately contacted the attorney who had handled my conveyancing, a sharp, deeply cynical man named Callahan. When I dropped the policy on his mahogany desk, he stared at it, dumbfounded. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose, his jaw tightening as he reviewed the endless email chains where Thane had explicitly guaranteed the freehold status in black and white. Callahan was furious on my behalf. He worked relentlessly over the next few weeks, untangling the bureaucratic nightmare, legally shielding me as much as possible and forcing the title corrections where he could. Through those long evenings in his office, sharing stale takeout and mutual outrage, I noticed how Callahan's mind worked, methodical, brilliant, and fiercely protective. A quiet camaraderie took root between us. But fixing the paperwork didn't erase the financial and emotional toll. I arranged a formal mediation with Thane. We sat in a sterile, windowless conference room, the hum of fluorescent lights amplifying the tension. I brought a thick binder of printed advertisements, brochures, and time-stamped emails, all screaming freehold. Thane sat across from me, leaning back in his leather chair, exuding a cloying arrogance. He barely glanced at the evidence. Despite the undeniable proof of his deception, he flatly refused to accept fault. He offered a non-apology disguised as corporate doublespeak. I didn't scream. I kept my voice perfectly level and made a single reasonable demand. When the time came for me to sell the property, his agency would handle the sale entirely free of commission to offset the damage. Thane chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that made my fingernails bite into my palms. He leaned forward, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. It was an offer for $1,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement and walk away. I stared at the paper, then at him. I stood up, leaving the document untouched, and walked out. The mediator urged me to sue, and Callahan practically begged to tear Thane apart in a courtroom, but my health was faltering. The chronic migraines and stress-induced vertigo that had plagued me for years were flaring up aggressively, turning my vision into a fractured kaleidoscope. A protracted legal battle would have broken me physically. So I told Callahan to drop the suit, but I never said I was dropping the matter. A few nights later, Callahan came over to check on me. I poured us 2 heavy glasses of Cabernet, the ruby liquid catching the dim light of my living room. I told him I needed a different kind of justice. Something slow, something inevitable. Intrigued, Callahan sat beside me on the velvet sofa, our shoulders brushing as I opened my laptop. Thane, in his infinite hubris, had left his personal social media profiles completely public. We scrolled through his life. Tucked between photos of luxury cars and golf outings was an album titled Boys on Tour. A raucous, alcohol-soaked vacation to a coastal party town, dated exactly 5 months after he sold me the house. We also pulled his business registration, locating his private home address. Callahan took a sip of his wine, his dark eyes gleaming with a mischief I hadn't seen before. "What are you thinking?" he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm thinking," I replied, tracing the rim of my glass, "that actions have consequences, and secrets have a way of surfacing. That night we invented L's. Elle was not a real person, but she had a very distinct voice. Exactly 1 year after the date the house sale closed, I walked into a florist on the opposite side of town. I paid in cash for a lavish, ostentatious bouquet of red lilies and had them delivered to Thane's private residence. The attached vellum card read, "Dear Thane, remembering you on this our special day, she has your eyes. Love, Elle." When I told Callahan what I had done, he laughed so hard he spilled his coffee. That shared wicked secret became the foundation of something far deeper than friendship. Over the next 6 years, the anniversary of the house sale became our own twisted holiday. Every year, without fail, the flowers arrived at Thane's doorstep. The messages varied slightly but maintained a consistent, terrifying theme. "Year 3, another year gone. She asked about you today, on this our special day, always L. Year 5, time flies, but the memory of our special day never fades. She looks more like you every month. Yours, L." Callahan, who had clients overseas, elevated the game. He arranged for cryptic, unsigned postcards to be mailed from the exact foreign coastal town Thane had visited during his Boys on Tour trip. They arrived at Thane's office, carrying vague sentiments of longing and missed connections, always ending with that singular, damning initial, E*. As the years ticked by, the revenge plot faded into the background of a much larger story. Callahan and I fell in love. The man who had defended my right to my sanctuary eventually moved into it. We built a life together, filled with quiet mornings, shared crossword puzzles, and the deep, abiding trust that comes from knowing someone's darkest, most vindictive corners and loving them anyway. Sending the annual L package just became a quirky anniversary tradition for us, a toast to the day our paths collided. I assumed the flowers were just a psychological itch for Thane, a bizarre annoyance he couldn't explain. I never anticipated the absolute carnage they would eventually unleash. 3 weeks ago, Callahan and I were sitting on our back patio, the evening air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. My phone buzzed. It was Una, the neighbor, who still kept her ear pressed firmly to the local gossip mill. "Did you hear about Thane?" she asked, her voice hushed with scandalous delight. "No," I said, putting her on speaker so Callahan could hear. "What happened?" "Divorced, lost his house, the agency fired him, he's completely ruined." Callahan paused midway through pouring the tea, the ceramic teapot hovering in midair. I leaned into the phone. "Why?" The story Una relayed was a masterpiece of cosmic alignment. Thane's wife, a sharp and fiercely proud woman named Maris, had finally reached her breaking point. For 6 years she had watched these bizarre floral arrangements arrive on the exact same date. She had read the notes about a child. She had seen the foreign postcards. Finally, a few months ago, she sat down and did the math. She traced the date, the anniversary of my house sale, and connected the dots. Confronted with 6 years of circumstantial evidence, Thane broke down and confessed to cheating on her. But here was the twist that made Callahan and I stare at each other in stunned silence. I hadn't meant to perfectly pinpoint his infidelity. I had just chosen the anniversary of the day he screwed me over. But it turned out that exactly 1 year before I bought the house, Thane had gone on a separate, unpublicized holiday. He had come back with a rather aggressive sexually transmitted infection, which he subsequently passed to Maris. At the time, he had gaslit her entirely, convincing her through a web of lies that he was innocent, that she must have contracted it elsewhere, or that it was a dormant fluke. Because I sent the flowers on the anniversary of the sale, the date fell precisely around the time he would have been recklessly sleeping around during that prior trip. When Mari saw the date, our special day, repeated year after year, she didn't just suspect a love child, she realized the timeline matched her STI diagnosis perfectly. The imaginary L had inadvertently supplied the exact alibi-breaking timeline Mari's needed to realize her husband was the source of her infection. The fallout was catastrophic. Mari's filed for divorce, taking half of his retirement savings and the primary residence. The resulting scandal within their tight-knit social circle bled into his professional life, costing him his partnership at the real estate firm. When the call ended, the silence on the patio was profound. Callahan slowly set the teapot down. He looked at me, a mixture of awe and mild terror in his eyes. I do feel a fleeting pang of guilt sometimes, usually when the rain hits the tin roof and the world feels small and fragile. I never intended to cost a man his marriage or his livelihood over a property dispute. But then I look around the home I fought so hard for, the sanctuary I share with the man who stood by me when I had nothing but a handful of misleading emails and a stress-induced migraine. I am reminded that Thane was a predator who thought he could lie, cheat, and infect those around him without consequence simply because he wore a nice suit and possessed a silver tongue. I didn't destroy his life. I merely provided the mirror. He built his own gallows, I just scheduled the flower delivery for the execution. We live in a world that demands immediate gratification. We want the instant clapback, the viral confrontation, the immediate apology. But there is a profound, almost magical strength in waiting. True justice doesn't always require a screaming match or a costly lawsuit. Sometimes, it just requires you to set the pieces on the board and let the target's own guilt do the heavy lifting. Karma is rarely a lightning bolt. More often, it's a seed planted in the dark, watered by time, until it grows thick enough to tear the foundation apart. And if you are very lucky, while you are waiting for the weeds to strangle your enemies, you might just find someone wonderful to sit beside you and watch the garden grow. If you enjoyed this story of patience, petty revenge, and unexpected romance, hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling me the most creative way you've ever gotten back at someone who wronged you. Remember, the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living well while they slowly unravel. See you in the next video.